The dining facility smelled like every dining facility I had ever walked into, which is to say it smelled like steam and floor wax and coffee that had been sitting on a burner 1 hour too long. And for a moment, standing in the doorway with a plastic tray in my hands, I let myself feel almost at home. I had been in the country for 3 hours. My bags were still in a rental car in the visitor's lot. My orders were folded in the inside pocket of a travel jacket that had ridden 2 airplanes and a shuttle bus, and I had not yet slept in the time zone I was now supposed to lead a battalion inside of. I wanted a tray of hot food and 20 minutes of anonymity before the machine of in-processing swallowed me. That was the whole of my ambition that afternoon. It is funny, the small things you are reaching for on the days that turn out to matter. I got in line behind a specialist with a sunburned neck and in front of 2 privates arguing quietly about a football team, and I moved my tray along the rail the way you move a tray along a rail, and I was thinking about nothing more complicated than whether the chicken looked dry when a hand closed around my upper arm. "No badge, no food, sweetheart," a voice said. "Dependents wait outside." I turned and looked at the man who owned the hand. He was young, 26 at the most, a sergeant with 3 chevrons freshly sewn in the particular shine of someone who has just been given a small amount of authority and has not yet learned what it is for. His name tape said Brenner. He was on facility duty, the thankless job of standing at the head of the line, checking identification cards, and keeping the flow moving. And somewhere in the long boredom of that shift, he had decided that a woman in civilian clothes with tired eyes and no visible identification was a problem he was entitled to solve loudly. I did not say anything. I have found, over a career built almost entirely out of rooms where people underestimated me, that the loudest thing in any room is a person who refuses to shout. So I let my arm stay in his hand, which surprised him because bullies expect either a fight or a flinch and are unsettled by a person who gives them neither. "Ma'am," he said, and the word was not respect, it was punctuation. "You can't be back here. This line is for soldiers. There's a visitor center by the gate. They'll take care of you." Behind him, 30 soldiers had turned their heads, the way soldiers always turn their heads when a small drama offers itself up during a long lunch. A specialist near the milk dispenser laughed. One short bark, the laugh of a man who is glad the trouble belongs to someone else. Somewhere near the salad bar, a young private, a girl who could not have been more than 20, went very still and watched me with an expression I could not yet read. Brenner tightened his grip a fraction and began to walk me toward the door, the way you might steer a lost tourist out of a museum exhibit, one hand on the arm, his body angled to herd. I let him. I set my empty tray on the return rack as we passed it. Not thrown, not dropped, just set down, the way you set down something you intend to come back for. I have learned to keep my hands quiet when the rest of me wants to move. My hands have done enough in my life. They can afford to be still. He pushed the glass door open with his free hand and released me on the far side of it into the flat white heat of a parking lot at midday. And he stood there for a second in the doorway with the cool air of the dining facility spilling out around him, and he looked satisfied. He thought he had won something. He thought the transaction was complete. "Have a good one," he said, and let the door swing shut. I stood in the heat with the sun pressing down on the back of my neck, and I did not feel angry, which is a thing that takes people years to understand about me and that some people never understand at all. I was counting exits, the way I always count exits, the way I have counted exits since a road in another country 11 years ago taught me that a person who knows where the doors are lives a little longer than a person who does not. I counted the doors of the dining facility. I counted the gaps in the fence line. I counted, without meaning to, the number of soldiers I had seen inside. 30 or so, and I thought about how many of them would remember this afternoon, and how many of them would learn the wrong lesson from it if I let the wrong lesson be the one that stood. And I thought about a road, and about boots that were still laced, and about the arithmetic of who comes out of a room and who does not, which is the only arithmetic I have never been able to finish. The door had sighed shut behind me, and the young sergeant had gone back to his rail, feeling large, and not one person in that building knew what had just walked out of it. That is the part I want you to sit with before the rest of it. Not the part where it turns, the part before. The long, ordinary minute where I was nobody, and I let myself be nobody, and the whole room agreed. Let me tell you who I actually am, because the story does not work if you do not know, and it does not work if you learn it the way the room learned it either, all at once, like a slap. Let me tell you slowly the way I have earned the right to tell it. My name is Adeline Voss. That afternoon, in the dining facility, I was 42 years old, and I was 3 days away from taking command of a battalion I had never met, on a post I had landed at 3 hours before, and I was standing in a parking lot because a boy with 3 stripes had decided I did not belong indoors. I had a bronze star with a bronze letter V for valor in a box in a footlocker in a moving truck somewhere on the interstate, and I never wore it to feel proud, because the thing it was given for is not a thing I am proud of. I am only alive for it, which is different. I did not become angry in that parking lot because I have stood in rooms that were genuinely dangerous, and a dining facility at lunch is not one of them. When a room has actually tried to kill you, every room after it has to work very hard to frighten you, and most of them do not have it in them. A young sergeant having a bad afternoon and taking it out on a stranger is not a threat. It is a weather pattern. You wait it out. Command, if you do it honestly, is mostly this: standing in the exact place where you are allowed to be doubted, and refusing to spend your authority just to feel better in the moment. Anybody can pull rank. Pulling rank is the cheapest thing in the Army. It costs nothing and buys nothing that lasts. The first sergeant I learned the most from, a man long since retired to a lake in a state I have never visited, told me once, in a motor pool, at 2 a.m, while we waited for a recovery vehicle that was never going to come, that anybody can be obeyed, but that being obeyed is not the job. "You want to be believed," he said, wiping grease off his hands with a rag that only moved the grease around. "Obeyed is Tuesday. Believed is forever." I did not understand him then. I was a lieutenant, and lieutenants understand almost nothing, which is a mercy for everyone. I understand him now. So I stood in the heat, and I did not reach for my orders, and I did not march back inside and announce myself, because announcing yourself is what you do when you are not sure the truth can stand on its own. And I have always believed the truth can stand on its own if you give it time and do not rush it. I checked my watch. The number on the face of it meant nothing to Sergeant Brenner, and it would have meant nothing to any of the 30 soldiers inside, and that was fine. The truth is, patient. I have made a whole life out of being the most patient person in the room, because I learned, on a specific day, that patience is a form of respect for how much you do not yet know. My sponsor was late. Every officer who has ever moved to a new post has stood exactly where I was standing, holding a phone, watching the minutes, being told by a text message that someone is 5 minutes out, and then 10 minutes out, and then genuinely almost there. Captain Priya Sandoval was 30 years old and brand new to the job of shepherding a lieutenant colonel through the first days of a command tour, and she had gotten stuck behind a training convoy at a gate, and she was mortified in the specific way that only a conscientious captain can be mortified. None of that was her fault. I want to be clear about that, because in the version of this story that the room told itself afterward, a lot of people were villains, and Priya Sandoval was not one of them. She was just late, and being late put me in a lunch line alone, and being alone in a lunch line is how the rest of it happened. I waited. I watched soldiers come and go through the doors. I read the building the way I read every building, which is to say as terrain, noting the high ground and the choke points and the places a person could stand and see without being seen. It is an exhausting way to move through the world, and I would give a great deal to stop, and I have never once managed to stop, not in 11 years, and I have made a kind of peace with the fact that I probably never will. Some habits are not habits. They are scars that learn to move. To understand why I let a sergeant march me out of a room without lifting a finger, you have to understand the road. And to understand the road, you have to go back to 2015, when I was 31 years old and a captain and in command of a company, and I still believed, in the private, unspoken way that all young commanders believe it, that if I planned well enough and cared hard enough, I could bring everyone home. It was the kind of day that goes wrong precisely because it started so ordinary. We had run the route a dozen times. The convoy was tight. The intervals were good. The soldiers were bored in the healthy way. You want soldiers to be bored, alert, but not afraid. I was in the second vehicle. My first sergeant, a broad and unhurried man named Deacon Faraday, was 3 vehicles back, and we had the easy shorthand of 2 people who had worked together long enough to finish each other's radio calls. He called me ma'am, the way some men say a prayer, out of habit and meaning both. The charge was buried under the lead vehicle, and it went off the way those things go off, which is to say the world simply became a different world, with no transition between the two. 1 second there was a road, and the next there was heat and dust, and a sound so large it stopped being a sound and became a pressure against the whole front of my body, And then there was the small arms fire coming in from a tree line that we had cleared, that we had absolutely cleared, that I would spend a year of my life proving to a review board that we had cleared. I did the thing you train for and hope you never do. I moved toward the fire instead of away from it. I got out of my vehicle and I ran to the lead vehicle, which was burning, and I pulled a soldier out of it. And I went back and I pulled another one out, and both of them lived, and I have their names in my phone to this day. And I text them on the anniversary, and they text me, and none of us ever says what we are actually saying. And then I went back a third time. I got 2 out. I have replayed the third for 11 years. Some math you never finish, and I have made my peace with that too, or I have told myself I have, which on the good days is close enough to the same thing. Deacon Faraday was on the ground near the third vehicle with a wound in his leg that would keep him in hospitals for the better part of a year, and he had dragged himself to specialist Jonah Aldner, and he had his hands on the boy, and he looked up at me through the smoke with his face gone gray, and he said the thing I still hear on the nights I do not sleep. "Ma'am, go. I've got him. Go." He didn't have him. Neither of us had him. Jonah Aldner was 19 years old, and he had signed up out of a small town for reasons that were half patriotism and half a wish to be somewhere his life mattered, and he had a mother who wrote him letters on actual paper, and he was gone before the medevac was even in the air, and there was nothing in my training and nothing in my rank and nothing in the whole enormous machine of the Army that could change that by 1 second. They gave me a medal for that day. They pinned the Bronze Star with Valor on the exact center of the thing I would trade back in a single heartbeat if trading were a thing the universe allowed, and it does not. So I keep the medal in a box, and I keep the boy in a different box, the one that does not close, and I carry both of them into every room I have entered since, including, that afternoon, a dining facility that smelled like steam and floor waxed, where a young sergeant decided I was nobody, and I let him, because I have stood next to the actual worst thing, and a boy with 3 stripes is not it. The last thing I see, when I let myself see the road, is Aldner's boots. They were still laced. He had bloused them that morning, the way we all blouse them, tucked and tight, and in the middle of everything coming apart, his boots were still laced, still exactly as he had left them, and I have never been able to explain to anyone who was not there why that is the detail that undoes me. It is the ordinariness of it. It is the way the small, careful things a person does in the morning outlive the person. I carry those laced boots into every dining hall in the world, and I will carry them into the next one and the one after that, until I am done carrying anything at all. Priya Sandoval found me in the parking lot at last, jogging the final stretch with her cover in her hand and an apology already halfway out of her mouth. She was flushed and horrified, and she called me ma'am 4 times in the first 10 seconds, and she explained about the gate and the training convoy and the road being down to 1 lane, and I told her it was fine, which was true this time, because being stuck behind a convoy is a thing that happens to everyone and is nobody's fault. She looked at the closed door of the dining facility and then at me, and something in my face must have told her a fraction of the story because she frowned. "Did you already eat, ma'am?" she asked. "We've got about 40 minutes before your first appointment. You should grab something. It's going to be a long afternoon." "I tried," I said. "There was a misunderstanding at the door. It's nothing. Let's get the coffee at least." She held the door for me, and we walked back into the cool and the steam, and I want you to understand that I was not walking back in to win anything. I had genuinely let it go. In my mind, the incident was already closed, filed under the enormous folder in which I keep the small indignities of a life spent being underestimated, a folder so large by now that 1 more page barely registers. I was going to get a paper cup of that overcooked coffee, and I was going to let Captain Sandoval steer me to my first appointment, and Sergeant Brenner was going to go on with his afternoon, believing he had correctly ejected a wandering dependent, and I was going to let him believe it because I did not yet see any reason that mattered enough to spend a scene on. Brenner saw me come back in, and his face did something complicated. First there was surprise, then there was a flush of irritation that a problem he thought he had solved had reappeared, and then there was the reflexive doubling down of a young man who cannot bear to be seen reconsidering. "Ma'am," he said, loud enough to reach the tables, stepping out from behind his rail. "Ma'am, I already told you, you cannot be in here. I need you to go back out and go to the visitor center. I'm not going to say it again." Captain Sandoval turned to him with the specific expression of a person about to make a correction that will change the temperature of a room, and I put my hand on her arm, gently, because I had made a decision without quite realizing I had made it, and the decision was to let this play out 1 more beat and see who in this building was worth keeping. You learn more about a unit in the 90 seconds after something goes wrong than you learn in the 90 days before. I wanted to see the 90 seconds. That was the moment First Sergeant Deacon Faraday came around the corner from the kitchen passage. He was older now, and heavier through the shoulders in the way that men who were once fast become as the years take the speed and leave the strength, and there was a stiffness in the way he carried his left leg that I recognized before I recognized his face, because I had watched that leg get made in a hospital 11 years before. He had a clipboard in his hand and a pen behind his ear and the distracted look of a senior non-commissioned officer running the thousand-small logistics of feeding several hundred soldiers. And he came around the corner, already half-turned, toward Brenner to answer some question about the serving line. And then he saw me, and he stopped. He stopped the way a man stops when he steps onto a road he did not know he was walking toward. The clipboard came down slowly to his side. His mouth opened and then closed. I watched 11 years fall off his face in the space of one breath, and I watched him do the arithmetic that I had done 1,000 times in 1,000 rooms. The arithmetic of, it cannot be, and then it is, and then it is her. "Ma'am," he said. It came out of him very quietly, almost a question, almost a prayer, the same 2 syllables he had said to me on a burning road, wearing all 11 of the years at once. "Hello, Deacon," I said. I had not planned to use his first name. It was not the correct and proper form of address, and I am, in most things, a stickler for the correct and proper form. But there are people with whom the rank is a language you speak in public, and the name is the language you actually think in. And Deacon Faraday had carried a 19-year-old boy in his own 2 arms while his leg was coming apart. And there is no chevron and no oak leaf large enough to sit between 2 people who have done that in each other's company. So I said his name, and I watched it land in him, and I watched his eyes go bright and steady at the same time, which is a thing that grief does to a certain kind of strong man, brightens and steadies him at once. And then First Sergeant Faraday turned to Sergeant Brenner, and his entire voice changed. It dropped, and it hardened, and it became the voice of a man who has run out of patience so completely that the patience has come out the other side into a terrible, quiet calm. "Sergeant Brenner," he said. "Attention." Brenner blinked. "Top, I was just handling a—" "I did not ask you a question," Faraday said. "I gave you an order. Attention." The room had gone very quiet now, the particular quiet of 30 people who have all realized at the same moment that they are watching something they do not understand but can tell is important, forks halfway to mouths, a conversation dying mid-sentence over near the windows. Sergeant Brenner stood there in the center of it all with the ladle of the moment still in his hand, so to speak, caught between the reflex to obey his first sergeant and the deeper reflex of a proud young man who cannot stand to be corrected in front of an audience. And he made the wrong choice. The way frightened people so often make the wrong choice. Doubling instead of folding. "Top, come on," he said, and he actually smiled, a nervous, disbelieving smile, and he gestured at me with the back of his hand as though presenting evidence. "She's nobody. She doesn't even have a badge. I'm not going to stand at attention because some lost—" "You will stand at attention," Faraday said, and he took one step toward Brenner, and the step closed something in the air. "When I tell you to stand at attention, you will do it now, and then you will keep your mouth closed until I tell you that you may open it again." Brenner came to attention. His body did it before his pride could stop it. Heels together, chin up, eyes forward, the training winning out over the ego by a fraction of a second. And I watched the smile die on his face as the first cold suspicion crept in that he had made a mistake whose size he could not yet measure. I felt, in that moment, the oldest pull I know. It is the pull to make myself small so that everyone else can be comfortable. It is the instinct to say gently that it is fine, that it was a simple misunderstanding, that there is no need for anyone to stand at attention, that we can all just get our lunch and move on with the afternoon. That instinct has a voice, and the voice is kind, and it has whispered to me my whole life, and it is, most of the time, a good voice. The kindest lie I know how to tell is the phrase, "It's fine," and I have told it so many times that it fits my mouth like a mouthguard, molded to my exact teeth from years of biting down on things I chose not to say. But I stood there in the quiet, with Deacon Faraday's grief and loyalty filling up the room like a change in air pressure, with 30 young soldiers watching to see what happened next, and I understood something that stopped my hand before it could wave the whole thing away. Letting it go this time, in this room, would not be mercy. It would be a lesson. Every one of those 30 soldiers would walk out of that dining facility having learned that the line means whatever the loudest, most confident person at the front of it decides it means. That a stranger with no visible credentials can be grabbed by the arm and marched out a door, and that the correct response, even from someone who outranks everyone in the building, is to smile and let it slide for the sake of peace. That is not a lesson I am willing to teach. I have spent too much of my life on the receiving end of that lesson to hand it down. So I did not wave it away. I made a different choice, and I made it without spectacle, because spectacle is what you reach for when you are not sure the facts will carry you, and I have always trusted the facts. I reached into the inside pocket of my travel jacket, and I took out my military identification card and the folded set of orders that had ridden 2 airplanes with me, and I set them on the steel rail of the serving line, side by side, unhurried, the way you set down a cup of coffee, not the way you slap down a winning hand of cards. There was no flourish in it. It was just a fact, laid on a rail, available to anyone who cared to read it. "First Sergeant Faraday," I said. My voice was quiet. I did not need it to be anything else. When you have buried people, a sergeant with a bad afternoon does not require volume. "It's good to see you standing." The word standing went between us and did its work. To everyone else in the room, it was a pleasant thing to say to a man on his feet. To Deacon Faraday, it was the whole history of a leg made in a hospital and a year of learning to walk again, and the specific fact that he was upright at all, and his eyes did the bright and steady thing again. Harder this time. "Because of you, ma'am," he said. "Same as always." And I decided, in that moment, fully and finally, what I was going to do with the boy holding the rail. I was going to set the record straight because the record needed to be straight for the sake of the 30 soldiers and for the sake of the line itself. And then I was going to give Sergeant Brenner a second chance he had done absolutely nothing to earn. Because a long time ago, on a worse day than this one, people extended grace to soldiers who had not earned it either, and that grace is the only kind of authority I have ever fully trusted. The authority that punishes is easy and common. The authority that corrects and keeps is rare, and it is the only kind that ever changed anyone I have watched be changed. Captain Sandoval, who had been standing at my shoulder reading the room and putting the pieces together, understood that I was not going to say the next part myself because I almost never say the next part myself. So she said it for me plainly, in the clear, caring voice of a captain who has decided a room needs to hear a fact out loud. "Sergeant," she said, "this is Lieutenant Colonel Voss. She takes command of your battalion on Monday." I watched the word colonel walk around that dining facility and change what every single soldier in it was standing on. I have seen it happen before in other rooms, and it never stops being strange to witness the way a single word can rearrange the furniture of 30 minds at once. The specialist who had barked out a laugh near the milk dispenser was not laughing now. The 2 privates who had been arguing about football had forgotten there was such a thing as football. And the young woman near the salad bar, the one who had gone so still when Brenner first grabbed my arm, the one whose expression I had not been able to read, was looking at me now with something that I finally recognized, because I had worn it myself at her age. It was the look of a young soldier who has just watched the world confirm something she had hoped was true, that the quiet ones are not always the powerless ones, that dignity does not always lose. Sergeant Brenner snapped from the position of attention into something even stiffer. An overcorrection, his tray forgotten on the rail, the color draining out of his face so fast I could almost watch it go. From the top of his forehead, down, like water leaving a glass. "Ma'am," he said. Ma'am, I didn't." He could not finish the sentence. There was no end to that sentence that would help him. "I didn't know." "No," I said. "You didn't." "That is the whole problem, Sergeant, and it is also the whole opportunity, and we are going to talk about which one it turns out to be." The room held its breath. I could feel them all waiting to see whether I would break him. There is a particular hunger a crowd has in the moment after the powerful person has been revealed and the arrogant person has been exposed. A hunger for the reckoning to be total, for the bully to be destroyed in proportion to his cruelty. I have felt that hunger myself. It is human, and it is understandable, and it is, I have come to believe, almost always the wrong thing to feed. So I let them wait. I let the silence stretch out past the point of comfort and into the place where discipline actually lives. Because the waiting itself was the lesson, and I have never been afraid of a silence in my life. Word travels through a dining facility faster than it travels almost anywhere else on a military installation because a dining facility is a crossroads, and everyone passes through it and everyone talks. By the time the silence had stretched to its full and useful length, the doors at the far end opened and Command Sergeant Major Roland Pike came through them at the unhurried, deliberate pace of the most senior enlisted soldier in a brigade. A pace that says, without a single word, that the person walking has never once in his career needed to rush, because the world tends to wait for him. He was 48 and gray at the temples and built like a man who still did the physical training he made everyone else do. And he took in the entire tableau in one sweep of his eyes, the way senior sergeants major read a room, and he understood most of it before he had finished crossing the floor. He came to me first, and he did it correctly, and he greeted me by my rank in a voice pitched exactly loud enough for the room to hear that the most senior enlisted man in the brigade knew precisely who I was and had come to pay his respects. "Ma'am," he said, "Command Sergeant Major Pike, welcome to the brigade. I apologize. This is not the reception you were owed." "Sergeant Major," I said, "good to meet you. It's been an interesting first hour." He turned then and looked at Sergeant Brenner, who was still at attention and still draining of color, and something moved across the sergeant major's face that was older and harder than anger. It was disappointment, which is worse. Anger burns out. Disappointment sits down and stays. He looked at Brenner for a long moment, and then he looked back at me, and he lowered his voice, though not so low that the front of the room could not catch the shape of it, because he wanted a certain number of people to hear. "Ma'am," Pike said, "say the word, and this stops being Sergeant Brenner's lucky day. I can have him out of this facility and standing in front of his company commander inside of 10 minutes, and I can promise you the paperwork will be thorough. You should not have to spend your first afternoon on this. Let me carry it for you." It was a genuine offer, and it was a generous one, and there is a version of me, a younger and more tired version, who would have taken it. There is a great and simple satisfaction available in that moment, the satisfaction of handing a cruel young man to a machine that will grind him fine, and telling yourself that justice has been done and that you kept your own hands clean by letting someone else do the grinding. I know that satisfaction. I have tasted it. It does not nourish. It is a sugar. You are hungry again an hour later, and the young man is still ruined, and nothing about the line is any safer for the next stranger who walks up to it without a badge. "I appreciate that, Sergeant Major," I said. "More than you know. But it is already not his lucky day. I would like it to be his teachable one instead, if he turns out to have anything in him worth teaching. And I would like to find that out myself, because in about 72 hours, these are going to be my soldiers. And I would rather start by learning who they are than by learning how fast I can process them out." Pike looked at me for a moment, recalibrating, the way good sergeants major do when an officer turns out to be a slightly different animal than they expected. Then something eased at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but the ancestor of one. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "That's a harder road." "Most of the roads worth being on are," I said. And he heard the whole of what I meant in it, though he could not have known why, and he nodded. I turned to Sergeant Brenner then, and I stepped closer to him, close enough that what I said next would reach him and the first two tables and no one else, because a correction that is meant to teach is delivered close, and a correction that is meant to humiliate is delivered loud, and I have never once confused the two. He was still at attention. His jaw was tight. There were the beginnings of something wet at the corners of his eyes, the particular shame of a proud young man who has just understood the exact dimensions of his mistake, and I did not enjoy it, whatever the room may have wanted me to feel, because I have been young and certain and wrong, and I remember what it cost. "At ease, Sergeant," I said, and he shifted, marginally, and I let him. "Look at me. Not at the wall. At me." He brought his eyes to mine. That took something. I gave him a small amount of credit for it privately, in the ledger I keep of who people actually are underneath what they do on their worst afternoons. "When you grabbed my arm," I said, "you did not know I was a colonel. I want to be very clear that that is not what you did wrong. If I had actually been a lost dependent, a spouse who took a wrong turn looking for the food court, someone's mother visiting for a graduation, someone with no rank and no orders and no medal in a box, everything you did would have been exactly as wrong as it is right now. Do you understand the difference between those two sentences?" He swallowed. I think so, ma'am." You put your hand on a stranger and you marched her out a door because you decided she was nobody, I said. The problem was never that you were wrong about who I am. The problem is that you believed there is such a thing as a nobody, and that it is your job to sort people into that category and act on it. There is no such thing. Not in my army. In my battalion, the leader eats last and the stranger eats first. And the reason we do it that way is not politeness. It is because the day you decide some people do not count is the exact day you become useless to me, because I cannot trust you with the ones who cannot defend themselves. And most of this job, Sergeant, most of the actual job is the ones who cannot defend themselves. He was quiet. The wet at the corners of his eyes had not spilled, to his credit. He was holding it. You are going to learn the difference, I said. Or you're going to find another battalion to be a sergeant in, because you will not be one in mine while you still believe in nobodies. That is the whole of it. That is the entire lesson. And I'm telling it to you quietly one time, instead of ending your career loudly, because a long time ago, some people gave me and mine more grace than we had earned, on a much worse day than this one, and I have spent 11 years trying to be worth it. Do not make me sorry, I extended it to you. Do you understand me? Yes, ma'am, he said, and this time there was nothing punctuational in it. This time the word was the thing itself. Yes, ma'am, I understand. Good, I said. Then go wash your hands and get back on the line, and when the next person comes through that door without a badge, you help them find where they are supposed to be. And you do it like their afternoon matters as much as yours. Because it does. Every single one of them does. That is not a slogan. It is the job. He went. He washed his hands, and he went back to the rail, and I watched him do it, and I watched the set of his shoulders, and I made a note in the private ledger that we would see. A single afternoon does not remake a person, but it can crack them open enough that the remaking becomes possible, and cracking Sergeant Brenner open, rather than throwing him away, was the first command decision I made on that post 3 days before I officially had the authority to make any command decisions at all. Command Sergeant Major Pike watched the whole of it, and when it was done, he came and stood beside me and spoke very quietly, out of the side of his mouth, the way sergeants major deliver the verdicts that officers are not supposed to hear them deliver. For what it's worth, ma'am, he said, I've watched a lot of officers take command. Most of them, the first thing they do is find someone to make an example of, so the formation learns to fear them. You just made an example out of mercy. The formation's going to remember that longer. He paused. I'll be honest with you. I came in here ready to be annoyed at whatever the new colonel was going to do. I'm walking out something else. Withhold judgment, Sergeant Major, I said. I've got 72 hours and a whole battalion to disappoint you in. He almost laughed. Yes, ma'am. But the thing that took the most out of me that afternoon was not the reckoning, and it was not the sergeant, and it was not the sergeant major. It was Deacon Faraday, waiting at a corner table with 2 cups of the overcooked coffee, one for me and one for him, the way he used to wait with 2 cups in a plywood building on the far side of the world, on the mornings before the days that went wrong and the mornings before the days that did not, back when we did not yet know which mornings were which. I sat down across from him. Captain Sandoval, reading the moment correctly, said she would push my first appointment 30 minutes and stepped away to make it happen, and left the 2 of us there in the corner with the noise of the dining facility going back to normal around us, trays clattering, a laugh somewhere, the ordinary sound of soldiers being fed, which is a sound Deacon Faraday and I both love more than almost any other sound in the world, for reasons that are the same reason. For a while, neither of us said anything. That is a thing you can do with certain people, sit in a silence that is not empty. The coffee was terrible. We both drank it anyway. It tasted like 100 other terrible coffees in 100 other plywood buildings. And I think we were both, for a moment somewhere else, on the good side of a morning before we knew. You run this place now, I said finally. I run this place now, he agreed. He turned his cup a quarter turn on the table, a small habit I remembered. Medically retired from the line after the leg, they offered me out entirely, full package, go home, put my feet up. I couldn't do it. I tried it for about 8 months, sat in a house, watched the grass grow. He shook his head slowly. So I came back in a different way. I run dining facilities now. I feed soldiers. Every kid that comes through that line, I feed. 3 squares. Hot food. Somebody who remembers their name. That's a good job, Deacon, I said. It's the best job I've ever had, he said, and he meant it. And then he was quiet again for a moment, and when he spoke next, his voice had dropped into the register we only ever use with each other. I figured I owed the world the ones I couldn't. You know, I couldn't get everybody home. So now I make real sure everybody eats. It's not the same. I know it's not the same. But it's what I've got, and I do it every day, and some days it's almost enough. He pushed up the sleeve of his uniform then, on the left forearm, and he showed me the tattoo. It was small and it was plain. No artwork, no wings, no eagle. None of the things men put on themselves to look like grief instead of feeling it. It was a date, and under the date, 2 initials. J and A Jonah Aldner, the date of the road. I looked at it for a long time. I did not touch it, because some things you do not touch, you only look at. And I did not say the name out loud, because we never say the name out loud, Deacon and I. We have an agreement about it that we have never once discussed. We just let it sit there at the table with us, the way it has sat at every table we have ever shared, an empty chair that is always occupied. A 19-year-old boy with his boots still laced, present in the only way we have ever figured out how to keep him present, which is by never, ever pretending he is not. I keep waiting to stop counting exits, I said. It was not a thing I had planned to say. It was not a thing I had ever said to anyone. But Deacon Faraday is not anyone. Every room I walk into, I count the doors. I count the people. I sort out who I'd have to carry and how I'd get them to the nearest exit and whether I could do it with this shoulder, which doesn't work the way it used to. I've been doing it for 11 years. I did it in that lunch line today, before your sergeant ever put a hand on me. I was counting exits while I let him march me out one of them. I turned my own cup a quarter turn, the way he had, without meaning to. I don't think I'm ever going to stop, Deacon. I used to think it would fade. It doesn't fade. It just gets quieter and stays. He nodded slowly. He did not tell me it would get better, because he does not lie to me, which is one of the reasons he is one of the 3 or 4 people on this earth I can say a true thing to. He did not tell me I had done everything I could because I have heard that from 100 people who were not there, and it means nothing from people who were not there, and it would have meant nothing from him either, and he knew it. No, he said. It doesn't stop. I count them too. Every kid on that line, I already know which door I'd take them out of. He looked at me, and his eyes were bright and steady, bright and steady. That's not the wound, ma'am. That's the promise. We keep counting because we keep promising. It's the same thing that got you off that vehicle and back into the fire 3 times. You think it's a scar. I think it's just love with nowhere good to go, so it goes to the exits. I have thought about that sentence more times than I can count in the days since. Love with nowhere good to go, so it goes to the exits. Deacon Faraday never finished high school, and he is one of the wisest people I have ever known, and the 2 facts have nothing to do with each other, and I wish more of the world understood that they have nothing to do with each other. The change of command took place 3 days later, on a Monday morning, on a parade field with the grass cut short and the sky doing the thing skies do at that hour, going from gray to a thin gold as the sun cleared the tree line. The battalion stood in formation. The colors were cased and uncased in the old ritual that the Army has performed 10,000 times, and that still, if you let it, means something. The passing of a unit's soul from one set of hands to another in front of everyone, so that no one can ever say they did not see it happen. I took the colors, I held the staff of them in both hands for a moment, feeling the weight, which is not a large weight, a flag and a pole, and is at the same time the largest weight I have ever held. Several hundred lives, and the promise to spend them carefully. I had been told by more than one well-meaning person that a change of command speech should be short and forgettable, that no one has ever been promoted for what they said, taking command, and several people have been ended by it, that the safe move is to thank everyone and say, "You are honored," and sit down. And most of that is good advice. I kept it short. But I did not keep it forgettable, because I had watched 30 soldiers in a dining facility learn something true 3 days before, and I wanted the whole battalion to learn it too. And a change of command is the one morning they are all standing in the same place at the same time, actually listening. So I kept my remarks to about 90 seconds, and near the end of them I said this. I said that in this battalion the leader eats last, and the stranger eats first, and that I did not mean it as a figure of speech. I meant it as a standing order, and that I would be watching to see who understood it and who only nodded at it. I said that the fastest way to lose my trust was to decide that some human being in front of you did not count, and that the surest way to earn it was to treat the person with the least power in the room as though they had the most. And then I said the last thing, the thing I had not written down, the thing I decided to say only as I was standing there with the colors in my hands and the gold light coming up over the trees. We are going to do hard things together, I told them. Some of them are going to cost us. I am not going to stand up here and promise you that everyone who deploys with this battalion comes home. because I have stood over the ones who did not. And I will not lie to you on the first morning, but I will promise you this. In this battalion, we do not eat until everyone is accounted for. Some of ours, from the years before you and I ever met, never will be. We carry them anyway. We carry them by how we treat the living. Take your places, let's get to work. I asked the formation to hold one breath of silence, then, for the ones not in it, I did not explain who I meant. I did not need to. Every formation in the army has ghosts standing in the gaps between the ranks, and every soldier in that formation had someone to think of for the length of one held breath. And the field went so quiet that I could hear the flag move on its staff, and somewhere in the second rank, a young soldier's breath caught, and I understood that the silence had found somebody, the way it always finds somebody, and I let it. Sergeant Brenner was in that formation. I had checked, before I walked out onto the field, that he was still assigned, that Command Sergeant Major Pike had not quietly moved him out over the weekend, because I would not have blamed Pike if he had. But he had not. Brenner was there, squared away, his uniform correct, his boots right, standing at the position of attention with an expression I could not read from the reviewing stand and did not try to. A man's face at his own commander's change of command tells you very little. What he does in the weeks after, it tells you everything. I was prepared to wait for the weeks. I did not have to wait as long as I expected. After the ceremony, in the loose, milling time when the formation breaks and the families come onto the field and there is coffee and small cakes under a tent, Sergeant Brenner found me. He waited his turn, which was correct, standing a little apart until the colonel I was replacing had finished shaking my hand and moved off. And then he stepped up and came to attention and asked permission to speak, which was also correct. "Go ahead, Sergeant," I said. "Ma'am," he said. He had clearly rehearsed it, and it had clearly not survived contact, and he pushed through anyway, which I respected. "Ma'am, I've thought about what you said. In the dining facility, I've thought about it a lot, actually. And I wanted to say, I'm not going to say I'm sorry because I figure you've heard sorry from a lot of people and it doesn't fix anything. So instead, I want to ask you for something. I'd like you to put me wherever I'm going to be the most useful and the least comfortable. The hardest job you've got. I'd like to earn the badge you were talking about, the one that isn't a badge." I looked at him for a moment. It is a rare thing, rarer than you would think, for a young person to understand that an apology is cheaper than a change, and to reach past the one for the other. It does not mean he was fixed. People are not fixed in a weekend. But it meant the crack I had made in him 3 days before had let something in, and that something was trying, clumsily, to grow, and my entire job, the whole of it, stripped of the ceremony and the colors and the rank, is to notice when something is trying to grow in a soldier, and to give it somewhere to grow. "All right, Sergeant Brenner," I said. "I am going to take you at your word, and I am going to give you exactly what you asked for, and you are going to regret asking for it at least twice a week, and that is how you will know I took you seriously. Report to First Sergeant Faraday. Tell him I sent you and tell him why. He runs the dining facility, and he is going to teach you what it means to feed people who cannot do anything for you in return, which is the hardest and most important thing a soldier can learn. And he learned it on a worse day than either of us is ever going to have. You do what he tells you for the next 90 days, and at the end of it, you and I are going to have another conversation, and it is going to go a great deal better than the first one." Something happened in his face. He had expected, I think, to be sent to the most miserable field problem I could find, to suffer in a way that felt like penance. Instead, I had sent him to a dining facility, to a serving line, to the exact place where he had done the wrong thing, to do it right every day, under the eye of the one man on the post best qualified to teach him why it mattered. I watched him understand that this was harder than any field problem, and I watched him understand that I knew it was harder, and I watched him decide to do it anyway. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "Thank you, ma'am." And then, because he could not help it, because he was still 26 and still learning where the edges of things were, he added, "First Sergeant Faraday. Was he the one who, in the dining facility, he knew you?" "He knew me," I said. "From before?" "From the worst day of both of our lives, Sergeant," I said. "Go find out what a man like that has to teach you. It is more than I could teach you in a year of the field." He went. And I stood on the parade field in the gold morning light with a cased and uncased set of colors and a battalion I was now responsible for. and I felt the familiar weight of it settle onto me. Several hundred lives, and the promise to spend them carefully, and I did the thing I always do, which is to count. I counted the soldiers on the field. I counted the exits from the field, which on an open field are everywhere and nowhere, which is its own kind of comfort and its own kind of dread. I counted the ways this could go well and the ways it could go badly, and I made my peace, as I always make my peace, with the fact that I would not get to choose all of them. And that was when I saw the young private again, the one from the salad bar, the one who had gone so still when a sergeant grabbed my arm, the one whose expression I had finally been able to read only when the word Colonel walked around the room. Her name, I would learn, was Nadia Cole, and she was 20 years old, and she was one of my soldiers now, one of the several hundred, and she was standing at the edge of the field near the tent with a small cake on a napkin, watching me across the grass, with the same expression she had worn in the dining facility, the expression of a young woman who has just watched the world confirm a thing she badly needed to be true. I know that expression from the inside. I wore it once, at about her age, watching an older woman I will not name do a quiet, dignified, immovable thing in a room full of men who had underestimated her, and I remember exactly what it did to me, which was to reorganize what I believed was possible. I remember thinking, so it can be done, so you do not have to become loud to become real. So the quiet ones are not always the ones who lose. That older woman never knew what she did for me. She was just doing her job with her spine straight. But I built a whole career on the back of a thing she never knew she taught me. And standing on that parade field, I understood that I had just, without intending to, done the same thing for a 20-year-old private near a salad bar, and that she would carry it, and that someday she would do it for someone else, and that this exact and invisible transmission is the only kind of immortality I have ever believed in. I caught her eye across the field, and I held it for a moment, and I gave her a small nod. Just that. Not a summons, not a speech, not a lesson, none of the things that would have made it about me. Just an acknowledgement, one woman to another, across a field and across 20 years, that I had seen her see it, and that she was right about what she saw. She straightened, without seeming to know she was doing it, the way I straightened all those years ago, and she nodded back, and something passed between us that had nothing at all to do with the difference in our ranks and everything to do with the thing that is underneath rank, the thing that was underneath it the whole time, in the lunch line, in the parking lot, on the road 11 years before, in the plywood building with the 2 cups of coffee, the thing that does not have a badge, the thing you cannot march out a door. 90 days is not a long time, and it is long enough. I went back to that dining facility on a Thursday near the end of the 90, not to check on anyone, though I will admit that was part of it, but because I had learned that the fastest way to know the true condition of a battalion is to eat where the soldiers eat and listen to how the room sounds when the commander is not expected. I went in civilian clothes again, on purpose, at the tail end of the lunch rush, with no entourage and no warning, and I got in line behind a specialist and in front of 2 privates, the way I had the first time, and I moved my tray along the rail. Sergeant Brenner was on the line, not on facility duty at the door this time, but working the serving station, ladle in hand, and I watched him before he saw me, because you learn the most about a person in the minute before they know you're watching. There was an old soldier ahead of me in the line, a retiree in a faded cap that named a war 2 wars ago, the kind of man who comes to a post-dining facility on the days he needs to be around it again. And Brenner served him the way you would want your own grandfather served. An extra spoonful without being asked, a quiet word, a nod that had actual weight in it. And then a young private came through, nervous, new, clearly lost in the way I had been made to feel lost, and Brenner caught it, and he leaned across the rail and told her where the good table was and where the coffee was, and that she should come back for seconds because there was plenty, and he did it without making her feel small for not knowing. I stood there and I watched a young man do, unprompted and unobserved, the exact opposite of the thing he had done to me 90 days before, and I understood that the crack had held, and that something had grown in it. He saw me then. His hand paused on the ladle, and for a second the old fear crossed his face, and then it went, and what replaced it was not fear, and was not the old arrogance either. It was a kind of steadiness. He came to the position of attention, right there behind the serving line, and then First Sergeant Faraday's voice came from somewhere down the rail, dry as a desert. "Sergeant Brenner, we do not stand at attention with a serving spoon in our hand. The colonel would rather be fed. Feed her." "Yes, First Sergeant," Brenner said, and something like a smile fought its way onto his face, and he turned to me and he said, "Ma'am, chicken or the fish? The fish is better today. I wouldn't tell you that if it wasn't." "The fish then, Sergeant," I said. "On your recommendation." He served me the fish and an extra spoonful of the vegetables without being asked, and a quiet word, and I carried my tray to a table, and I sat and I ate in the ordinary noise of a room full of fed soldiers. And Deacon Faraday came and sat across from me with his own cup of the terrible coffee, and neither of us said very much, because we did not need to. Near the far wall, Private First Class Nadia Cole was sitting with 3 other young soldiers, and she was doing most of the talking, and they were listening to her the way a squad listens to the one among them who has decided who she is going to be. And when she caught sight of me across the room, she did not go still and small the way she had 90 days before. She sat up straight, and she gave me a small nod, one soldier to her commander, and she went back to her table and her people, and that was exactly right, and I loved her a little for it. That is the part of the story the room never sees, and it is the only part that has ever actually mattered to me. The reveal is loud and the reckoning is satisfying, and neither one of them changes a single thing by itself. What changes things is the 90 days. What changes things is a young sergeant learning to serve an old man in a faded cap like the man is his own blood. What changes things is a frightened private becoming the one at the table who others lean toward. What changes things is slow and quiet, and it happens on serving lines and at corner tables and in the 10,000 small, unwitnessed decisions to treat the person in front of you as though they count, and it never once announces itself, and it is the whole of the job. I want to talk to you now, whoever you are, wherever you are listening to this, because I did not tell you this story to make you angry at a young sergeant who was only briefly the villain, and is now, I am glad to report, one of the more promising non-commissioned officers in my battalion, 90 days and a great deal of humility later. And I did not tell it to you so that you would cheer when the word colonel walked around the room, though I understand the wish to cheer, and I do not begrudge it. I told it to you because somewhere out there, and maybe today, and maybe an hour ago, someone decided that you were nobody. Someone looked at you, at your quiet, at your patience, at your lack of a visible badge, and they sorted you into the category of people who do not count, and they acted on it, and it stung, and you are still carrying the sting. I know. I have carried 1,000 of them. I carried one out a glass door into a parking lot 3 days before I took command of several hundred soldiers, and I let it happen, and I want to tell you what I have learned about that specific sting, because I have made a long study of it. Here is the thing. When someone decides you are nobody, you do not owe them a demonstration. You do not owe them your orders laid on a rail. You do not owe them the reveal, the reckoning, the moment where the room turns and they understand. Sometimes those moments come, and when they come, they are not nothing. But they are not the point, and they are not yours to summon, and a life spent waiting for the room to turn is a life spent letting other people decide when you get to be real. You were real the entire time. You were real in the lunch line. You were real before the word colonel ever walked around the room, and you would have been exactly as real if it never had. What you owe, in the moment someone denies you, is not proof. It is your own composure. It is the refusal to become smaller or louder than you actually are. It is the quiet, immovable fact of yourself, kept intact, carried out the door with your head level and your hands still, so that whatever you are, on the inside, survives contact with whoever decided you were nothing. That is the whole of it. That is the only reliable victory. The truth of who you are is patient. It has always been patient. It does not need you to force it up in front of a crowd. It will stand up in its own time, in its own way, and sometimes you will be there to see it, and sometimes you will not, and either way, your job, the only job that is actually yours, is to still be standing, undiminished, when it does. So if you have been marched out of a line you had every right to stand in, hear me. Keep your composure, keep your name, keep your quiet. Do not spend yourself proving to small people that you are large. Let the truth be patient, and stand up with it when it stands, and in the meantime, feed people. Account for the ones who cannot be accounted for. Treat the person with the least power in the room as though they have the most. That is not weakness, I promise you, from the far side of a career built entirely out of rooms that underestimated me, that it is the strongest thing there is. The end.